Remember, before you get to this point, you've already assigned the new materials to your character, whichever one you've chosen. You've also created the character sets so that you can separate all their pieces. I'm going to make sure I'm on the Andy character set for this one. Like I showed with the Homer one, I would have a Homer one when I did the Mr. Manhattan last time. I did the Manhattan rig, his name, whatever down there, okay? So the first thing you need to do for any of these poses is find a good pose. So I found that if you type in character pose reference like this, a lot of times you're going to get a drawing of one. If you instead look for a specific thing like karate photograph, you will actually find photographs of karate or dancing or whatever. Those are typically things you want to look for, is something that has action to them, because those poses will translate a lot better than just just regular photography of like someone standing there, especially, you can't really see what's going on there, okay? So something with action, dancing, karate, yoga, something with movement to it. Where's my one I picked? There we go. So something like this is good because there's a lot of movement in that picture. If I just had a black and white image of an outline of this person, a silhouette, you would obviously be able to tell exactly-ish what's happening in that picture, and that's what you want, okay? We also have to keep in mind that regardless of which character we pick, we are creating an impression of that pose. We are not going to be able to create that exact pose because our character may have different proportions. So Homer, like I showed last time, will never be able to get into a pose like this. It'll be similar but not the exact pose, okay? So I'm going to just slide this over to my other screen for a minute, and then I'm going to go through my Andy stuff and set this up real quick. So I'm going to save my scene as. I don't want to overwrite the ready to pose one. That's the one I'm going to use at the start of all of these. So when I do each pose, I'm going to reopen the ready to pose and go from there. When I do my walk cycle, I'm going to open up the ready to pose and go from there. When I do my animation, open that one up and go from there. My computer is doing this great thing where it just white screens, so it's wonderful. So I will call this Sarcona Pose 001. Yes. Okay. So I've renamed it so I don't overwrite the other one. I'm on my Andy character set, and then I'm just going to go in here and start posing. I don't need all of the bells and whistles on for this. So things like the face sliders I can turn off, and the face controls I can turn off. I don't need those at the moment. Now, when you look at something like this, let me see if I can maybe just move that over like here. I don't really need the outliner, so I can probably close that tab group. Yes. And I can probably shrink this some. Right, that should be good enough. Okay. So what I want to do first is set up the hips. The hips are going to be the main area that control where the character is going to be at. And if the hips aren't in the right spot, this isn't going to work out. So I'm going to show you first what people do that they shouldn't do, which is they try to put the appendages in the spots where they think they are. So as a new person, sometimes you will grab like the foot, and then you will move the foot forward like this. And notice how Andy's leg is stretching. We don't want stretching in this. You will also maybe, let's say, rotate this, and you'll stick it there, and you will think that that is an acceptable posture for this foot to be in. It's intersecting, which is bad. It's stretched out, again, which is bad. Andy's hips have not come into play at all in here, and it just doesn't work, okay? So your first step is to take the hips and get them positioned. Now, it doesn't matter if I keep Andy like this or like that or whatever. I just have to get them in position. So if I were to look at where those hips are at, this hip here, where her leg is at, is probably higher than the other hip. That other hip is probably on a bit of an angle. They're also probably twisted so that this hip is actually forward. So this hip is forward, and it's probably twisted up like that. Ignore the fact that Andy is like drunk right now. It's just like that, okay? So it's probably something like this is how Andy's hips only are positioned. Then what I'm going to do is kind of get the rest of Andy in position. So let's say that I go to the spine here, and I just kind of rotate that up a bit. There we go. Just so Andy is more straightwise. Her hips look kind of weird. That's why it has this other control where I can kind of tweak that just a little bit. All right, so then I can start working my way out from the center. So I get that hip in the right spot, then I can start moving outwards towards the outer sides. I like to do the legs first because auto stretches off. There we go, make sure those are good. I always make sure auto stretches off so it doesn't stretch automatically. If I need to move Andy down so that her legs actually touch the ground, then I don't screw up the hands in the process of that, okay? So I'm going to move the legs and put them in position. Now, to get her foot in this position here, I could definitely do that. That is an acceptable way to do that. But there's all these controls that also allow me to do that. Your rig may not have all those controls. Andy does. Some rigs do, some rigs don't. So I believe that's toe roll. If I go like that, you can see how it automatically puts Andy on her toe in there. So then I could just take this and push that down some, and then push that forward some. Okay? So I'm looking at how Andy's hips are positioned. I'm also looking at where the weight that Andy's body is on. So most of the weight is probably on this front foot here. It can't be on that back foot because Andy can't support herself, or the dancer can't support herself with all the weight back there. So it's probably mostly like 75% on this foot, and then the other 25% is on that one. So I'm going to move that forward like so. I think the knee probably needs to come up and over. I think this can probably come up a little bit more, forward a little bit more. This back foot, and you'll see how I bounce around. So it's not like I'm trying to stay in one spot. I'm constantly going to be moving back and forth. This feels like it probably needs to come forward a little bit more, maybe a little bit back off on that. I think this probably could come out a bit more. Maybe Andy can come down a bit more. That feels like that's about what it's doing. There's also a toe pivot that allows me to twist where the toe is at. So that's why I use that toe roll, so I can use these other controls with it. Okay, so that's good there, all right? So then I'm going to go to the other spine controls and just start to create this. Now it looks like Andy's hips are actually pushed forward a bit like this. And then you have this arc in the back that you can see right here. This foot's going to have to come forward a little bit because I just locked the leg out. There we go. So I'm going to use these circles to push Andy's body a bit forward, and then start to rotate the spine back a bit, and then start to rotate that back a bit. There we go. And you can see how I'm kind of capturing the essence of that movement. I think the shoulders are next. You can see the shoulders here. That right shoulder is up in the air. The left shoulder is down. Okay? So the shoulders are now going to have to be adjusted. So I will take the right shoulder down. I will take the other shoulder up. That's good like that. A little bit more towards the camera. This circle can probably go back in a little bit because that looks weird. There we go. When your shoulder moves up, I don't just grab this and rotate it up. That's not how our arms work. This collarbone here is what does it. So I would raise the collarbone up like this, probably raise that forward like that. Oops. Give this circle a little bit of rotation up. Rotate the hand around. Grab the circle and then start to, get into that position. So it looks like it's just the base. Her fingers look like they're pretty straight. And then I think that thumb is just reach, maybe. There we go. And I rotate Andy's head back. I'm moving pretty quickly between all the controls because I've used Andy for so long that I know what all the controls are. It'll take you a bit, but the whole point of this exercise is to see how to set poses so that when we get into our walk cycles, you can set poses. When we get into our animation, you can set poses. And the quicker you can get to that point, the easier time you're going to have and the more higher quality your animation will turn out. So this is like back, and this is rotated back a bit and down. And then this is where it gets a little tricky because in order for Andy's hand to be on her hip, so close. I have to kind of play this game to get it lined up. And this is going to be rotated like that and like that. Try to take these controls one at a time. Don't try to go too crazy with them. That's probably too much there. Andy's kind of hitting her limit. Her wrist is getting kind of like squished. So I just need to adjust that a little bit. And then I can take the shoulder, maybe rotate that in some, take the elbow, rotate that a bit there. And then just grab the fingers and then start getting the fingers so that it looks like Andy has her hand on her hip. Oops, am I that far off? I am. All right, a little bit more rotation here. And then some more tweaking. Now, if you pick poses that are especially difficult for you to get into, this doesn't work. But if you pick a pose that you can get into, sometimes it does help to actually get into the pose so that you can actually see what are the hips doing, what's the spine doing, what are the shoulders doing. It sounds weird, but it definitely does work. Okay, so that looks pretty close to that pose. Got a little triangle here, got some nice space there, nice arc. All right, so that works. Sweet. So then what I want to do is I'm going to render these out. So each one of these images that we render are going to be 3000 by 2400, and you're going to have 3 images, okay? The ones up here, that's how big they're going to be, is 3000 by 2400. You're going to do them as one big image, boom, 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 all 3 of them like side by side, or you can have all 3 of your poses in one. So 2 of those up there are like dance scenes where it's like a dance area where you can see all 3 people in the same pose. So you could do that too where you would have, let's say this is my dancer, I have 3 of them. If that's the case, I'm going to render it out at double the size, okay? So it'll be 6000 by 4800, just so it can, again, print and still have nice details to it. So I set up my render settings to 3000 by 2400. I make sure I'm in Arnold. I'm not sure how that got switched back. That should be good, yes. I may want to take my settings up here. That's fine. I'm going to hit my render region and kind of frame this. I don't think I have any lights in the scene. I have my sky dome, but no lights. Okay, so I guess we'll see how this turns out. Now you want to fill this pretty well. Like you can see where this box is. That's my entire region. I don't want to be way far back because that's just a waste of space. So I would then render this. Oops. And then I'm looking for, obviously, I don't want to have any dark spots. I don't want to have any, whoa, what's going on? Oh, come on, Andy. There we go. I don't want to have any weird lighting issues or graininess or anything. I want to get as clear of an image as I can. And if you can grab it from about that same pose, try to grab it from about that same pose. You will be turning in your images that you're using, so I need to right-click and save this image. And then you'll also be turning in this image so that I can see them back to back, okay? So this is still going. This says rendering. It'll go for however long, and then once I'm done, I go to File, Save Multilayer EXR, or Save Image. In this case, there's not really a difference. And then I'll give it a name. Oops. Actually, I have to go to my options first. I did not go to the options. Image options, there we go. And 8-bit is fine, and apply gamma and exposure. There we go. So now I can save my image. And this will be Sarcona pose 001.tiff. Okay, so that saves my TIFF image, and image 1 is done. There we go. Now, just to be safe before I exit and go on to pose number 2, I want to make sure that I'm on my Andy character set, and then I want to hit the S key. Oops. Make sure nothing is selected in my scene, and then hit the S key. There we go. And that will set a keyframe for all the items that I did. So what happens sometimes is that people set up their stuff. They don't realize that they've set a keyframe on the character at some point. They play the timeline or reopen the file, and everything goes back to where it was when they first opened it, and they have to redo their pose. So by doing this at the end, by hitting the S key and making sure that it has a ridiculous number here, like 200 and some, it sets a keyframe for everything that I've animated or moved. And so now if I reopen it, I'm pretty certain that I won't screw it up. All right, so now when I go to pose 2, I just go back to my folder. I'm going to open up Photoshop while I'm waiting for this. And then I open up the ready to pose, and then I go for my next one. So I would save that image, and then I would go find another one. So maybe the next one I want is gymnastics. Nope, those are all boring. All right. Remember, no drawings, okay? No like vector art. Find an actual image. Ip Man fight. There we go. And something like this doesn't work. It's too close. You can't see the whole body. Something like that could work. It'd be awkward to just do the one person, though, so you'd probably want to do both of them. Here's another one that could be a good one, okay? So try to find a good pose that you could use. I'm not going to go through all 3 of them. Yoga. If you do anything like, let's say, something like this, the process is exactly the same for starting off. So I'm going to open up my pose to pose 1, or my ready to pose. Yes. I'm going to save it as number 2. I don't know what it thinks it's doing. It's not doing anything I want to. Oh, while it's waiting, I'm going to jump over to here. There it goes. So this will be pose number 2. Okay, so if I'm doing that pose like this, the character is obviously upside down. I start in the same spot. Now, it may get weird because when I take Andy and I flip Andy upside down like that, obviously that looks horrible, but you have to ignore the horribleness for a minute while you start to reorient the rest of the parts. There we go. I rotate the feet around, pull it back. And this one you really can't see what's going on, so just get yourself into that pose and then you'll figure it out. No. I think your legs are crossed. That's what it looks like. I don't know what pose that is. There's no other pictures of that pose that I can see. Well, her legs are probably crossed anyway, okay? So if that's the case, I would try to just start putting, obviously, her hips first, and then start putting her legs into whatever pose that would be to get her legs in there. Now they're going to intersect at some point, so you just have to work through that and get it so that it doesn't look like they're intersecting from your view. I would also probably find a different angle than the one they're using because it's hard to even see what's happening in that pose. So in that case, it would be better to find something different than their angle they're using. Okay, so imagine I've got that in the perfect pose. This might be a better angle to shoot this from versus that, which is not very easy to see what's going on. All right, so let me get this. So I'll show you some of the poses from last semester so you can see those. D-drive, too gray. That's not too gray, it's too gray. This, that. So there's that pose. Now this is just a basic pose. Obviously there's two characters in this scene. She animated the faces, so you can see that. Again, you can look at where the hips are moving. She added some light on the side for some rim light. And she even took this one a bit further and added it into a scene. And then you can see she added some blood to that, which is awesome. And then she has, I think that's the same one. I think I put that inside my demo folder, inside 2540, inside here, inside there. So that's the default one. There's the Kung Fu one. Okay, so this one, she has like a fisheye lens on the camera. Again, you don't have to stick with, here's just the pose. If you want to go outside that box, do a little bit more, you can actually frame it, make a little environment. Keep it simple. This isn't a crazy environment. If you look at it, it's basically just a cube with some divisions, some extrusions, and some color and some nice lighting. Okay? There's also some depth of field in here, something we haven't covered in this class, but I will show it just so you can see how to do that kind of thing. Let me see where I put my poses here. Do I have it? There we go. There we go. Anti-rig. Nope. Demo reel. Pose. There we go. Okay. Photoshop. All right. So here are the poses that I did last semester for Mr. Manhattan. I'll just leave that as an alpha channel. Ouch. So these are part of a series of images. I don't know why it's so dark. Let me adjust my curves, levels. There you go. That's better. So I did add a bluish colored light to this. I do have some depth of field on here. You can see how this is a bit fuzzier than this area right there. It was weird working with him because he's in a bikini the entire time, which is when you're trying to get some of these poses, you gotta get close to him. All right, so there's that one, and there's that one. So you only have to do 3 poses. Oh no. He thought he was going to jump, but he didn't. You can see his hand there. He caught himself. Okay, so you're only doing 3 poses, but keep in mind that you still need to go through and get those. I'm not super worried about like facial expressions as far as like getting every single nuance of the face, But if they are, if it does add to the expression of it, definitely do it. Don't just leave them with a bland face, okay? These poses, especially right here, wouldn't look as interesting if they used the standard face of just their mouth closed and their eyes closed and everything. To do, any of the depth of field stuff, I'm just going to go to a new scene so you can see it. It does eat up resources a bit, so you have to be just a little bit aware of that. Okay, so depth of field is basically allowing you to create this sense of distance or depth that you would typically get with like a real camera. So I'm still using Arnold. And I'm going to add in, this is the same kind of lighting I had in the other one, which was the sky dome light. Oops, I don't want that one. I want the other one. There we go. Okay. So this is perfectly clear, and this is what one of the CG things that makes CG look so fake is having crystal clear images from shot to shot. Like in the real world, it doesn't happen. So on here, I'm going to go to my camera. So I'm going to go to my camera, which is right under View, and click the camera button, and then hit Control-A to get to the attribute editor. And way under the Arnold area, right there, there is Enable Depth of Field. So I turn that on, and then I have to set my focus distance. In order to figure out how far something is from the camera, I'm going to go to Display, Object Details. Where's it at? Oh, Heads Up Display. There it is, Object Details. And that puts this little map up here. And what I can do is if I click on an object like this, it'll tell me that that object is 18.914 units from the camera. So if I type in 18.914, that gives me the object that will be in focus, which should be this one, okay? Now the aperture size is set to 0, which in Maya means just don't worry about it. The second I start playing with this, I'll start to get that depth of field. So there's 0.1. You can see how I get this fuzzy and that fuzzy. If I take this up to, let's say, 5, you can see the effect. Okay, so that way I can get that depth of field look to my scene. I can also go in here, and if I grab my sky dome light, and I enable color temperature, sometimes you have to close this and then reopen it for any of this to affect it. Nope, it's just thinking still. I can then play with the color temperature of this, and that will give my scene a different feel to it, like a different coloration. And if you're curious what the color temperature means, Kelvin temperature. There's a thing called the Kelvin temperature scale, which is basically like how light temperatures get measured. So the default, which was at 6,500, I believe that's what it was about here. It was like a bluish tint. The lower you go, the more orangey you're going to get. So if you're looking at, like, I want this to look like it's in a, this is a good one here. I want this to look like it's in a bedroom or something like that. You can use these warmer colors, or if you want it to look like it's outside, you can use these higher colors. So if I take that number, right now it's at 10,000, I pull it down, you'll see how I get more of an orange hue to this, and this way I get more of a blue hue. So something, oops, that's way too much. Something inside with this kind of like, fluorescent-y lighting, or something outside in the sun. So you can really create this nice little look to that. I would also recommend, if you're trying to create some nice looks to your stuff, that if you create an additional light in your scene, let's just set that there. I'll create an area light. Pay attention to what the shadows look like. Don't just drop lights in and just kind of assume that Maya's going to make everything look good. It just doesn't. Okay, so I'm going to turn my renderer back on. I'm going to crank my lighting up on this, so like a lot, like 50,000. Okay, then go back down from there. So 5,000, that's too much still. 500, that's probably good. I'm also going to take down my depth of field because that's way too much. Where are you, Arnold? There you are. And I'm also going to take down that back intensity a little bit. There we go. So that's fine. And then I will go to my light and just adjust that a bit more intense. This exposure here, just so you can see it too, the intensity is just like the intensity of the light, but the exposure is like a multiplier. So if I set that to 1, it's going to double it. If I set it to 2, it's going to quadruple the intensity. So instead of me setting this to 2000, I could just play with the exposure. So looking at these shadows here, the shadows that Maya will give you by default are black. Shadows in the real world are not black. If you look around as you're looking at things, the shadows are never just a pure black. So it's always best to give them some kind of color. So if I give them even this kind of like, oh, did that just go gray? Yeah, it's a little bit purple. I'm going to go like that, maybe like that. So there's just a hint of color in them, and you'll find that that's going to go a long way to making your scenes look a lot more appealing than just having the straight shadows, the straight colored shadows. Also, the size of your light will dictate how... See, I moved my camera and now everything's out of focus because my focus distance is now way off. So which item did I want? That one, 36. So I will go back to Arnold. I will either just turn that off or just set that to 36. There we go. So the size of my light will control the sharpness of my shadows. So right now they're pretty soft. As this light size comes down, the intensity doesn't change. But you'll see that my shadows become a lot more crisp. So be aware of that too, that you don't want to have shadows that are fighting the scene or trying to like take over it. Here, you know, this could have a nice dramatic effect, having these long shadows in the scene. But this makes these things pop a bit more. Just because I have nice bright lights on those objects and the soft shadows in the back, just make those pop a bit more. You may also, if you do model stuff for your scene, I'm going to switch cameras here real quick. You may want to add bevels to stuff. So we haven't gotten into a lot of modeling, but just so you can see, I can grab the edges for all of these, shift right click it, and then go to bevel, and then I can just add a slight bevel to this. And then that alone will make the scene, at least that one, appear a bit more realistic than the ones around it. Because it has that soft bevel, this will look nicer than any of these other ones. There we go, beautiful. Okay, so just some extra tips just in case you do want to model something, you want to add something to your scene. Keep in mind that it should add to the scene, not take away from it. It shouldn't distract. And then make sure that whatever it is, it just doesn't look like crap, to put it bluntly. Cool. So those are your poses. You will have 3 of them. By the time you're done, like I said, you will have 3 different ones that you've done. Where's my other one? Here's some other poses. You can see they added some like little effect inside there. There we go. That's that same one. Oops. No, it's just a regular pose of Andy. There's There's Mary fighting with Mary again. They're always fighting. Okay, so it gives you plenty of ideas of different things that you could do for your stuff. Let me jump back to that one robot one real quick. I want to point out how wide open like that. There it is. So that looks pretty fake as far as the pose. Obviously, it's a robot, so it can do whatever it wants. But it couldn't actually position itself like that. There's no way for it to support its weight on this one leg and have its body further back. Okay? So if you're sitting on one leg, I'm sure that's a yoga pose too. Like that looks fake, right? It would be something like this where that front leg is bent and all the weight is being distributed through that foot, but your body weight overall has to be spread out enough that it does work like that. Okay, there's also a bunch, if you've gone to DeviantArt before, there's a lot of people who post stuff on there too that you can definitely check out as well. Oh, there's this, oops, too many, skipping through. This is another thing that people forget. If you look at these platforms, like these are actually nice renders. The texture on this looks really cool. This was something they added afterwards. But look at how choppy that platform looks, right? So that's something that you have to be aware of. Also, all the grain that's in here, stuff to be aware of, because you don't want to go through the time of setting up all of your stuff. That was the other rendering they did for it. And then have that kind of thing. Don't leave these platforms that have these corners in them. Extend them out like a crazy amount so that you don't have, you know, that kind of thing happening. There's the one that's on the wall. Here's Andy with demon eyes. This is if you do not do your textures correctly. Andy will have demon eyes. There's more poses. And Andy also has, let me jump back to Andy real quick. If you get to the spot where your character is looking blocky, the Andy default doesn't. Andy, it comes in pretty smooth already. But on Andy, there's different levels of smoothness. Your character may also have different levels of smoothness. Default smooth with this set to 3 was actually pretty decent. It looks good. But on Andy, I can actually set this to smooth +2, and Andy will be very smooth. There'll be a lot of detail on the character, where maybe the arm looks a little choppy, it would smooth all that stuff out. So again, stuff to be aware of as you're looking at what the final rendering looks like. Okay, your character may not have that, Andy does have that. Cool. Questions on any of these yet?